Well, hello and welcome to this webinar. The Orton Family Foundation, in partnership with the Citizens Institute on Rural Design, or CIRD, that is an initiative of the National Endowment for the Arts, are bringing you today's event on engaging diverse communities to shape rural design. Hello, I'm Fran Stoddard, your host for this webinar. Today we have three terrific practitioners who will introduce us to communities that have effectively involved diverse voices for community design projects. They'll share how they identified and engaged diverse perspectives, formed partnerships, and what doors opened as a result. Joining us for today's webinar are Liesel Fenner. She is the Public Art Program Director at the Maryland State Arts Council. Welcome, Liesel.
Thank you.
Great to have you here. And Joseph Kunkel is the Executive Director of the Sustainable Native Communities Collaborative and Enterprise Roads Fellow. He joins us from New Mexico. Hi, Joseph.
Hi there.
Okay. And finally, Shane Hale is the City Manager of Cortez, Colorado. Hi, Shane.
Hey, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. And we'll get right back to them in just a minute after I've kind of explained how this all works. We have over 200 registrants for our webinar today, so we've muted the rest of you to get as clean an audio signal as possible. The Adobe Connect platform allows us to share our presenters' visuals and take your questions. Be sure to click on that link to follow along. Many of you have already sent in questions for today's webinar, and we want to thank you for that. Our speakers have reviewed them, and some of those questions will be answered during the presentations. There will also be an opportunity to ask questions during and after their brief presentations. A Q&A box is always available for your questions. If you have any technical problems, you can dial *0 for phone issues or email Caitlin Davison at cdavison@orton.org. And I believe that is, yeah, it's right there on your screen at the bottom of that welcome box. So let's get on with the webinar. Liesel Fenner is a Public Art Program Director for the Maryland State Arts Council and has worked for over 20 years in the art and design fields from San Francisco to Boston, Metro DC, and Maryland. She formerly managed the Public Art Network at the American Arts and worked on public art programs and projects nationally. She's a licensed landscape architect and urban designer and received her master's from the Rhode Island School of Design. She has served on numerous public art selection panels, arts nonprofit boards, led community-driven public art projects, and loves working with artists and teams from the kernel of an idea, implementing the project through to final completion. Welcome, Liesel, and take it away.
Thank you, Fran. It's an honor to be on the webinar with the CIRD program and Orton Family Foundation. Thank you very much for inviting me. I will be highlighting, let me start first with a definition of public art, because many people, there are multiple definitions, and I think the one that is most poignant is that the work is free, that we're not charging an admission ticket to view the work. It's available to anyone, and this is important because this could be a person's first introduction to art ever, at whatever age, from whatever culture you're from. The work is accessible to all, and I think this is a very inclusive definition from Lucy Lepard that also includes the importance here of community involvement and engagement and respecting the environment, and some of the projects I'm going to show illustrate that. So yes, here we have Maryland, and I'll get the little pointer here highlighting where we'll be going from around the state, starting in Frederick, which actually was a rural community, but because of the increased development from the development of arts and cultural programs and public art, it is now a major city, and we'll be highlighting the artists and artwork that then spread westward to Hagerstown, and we'll be talking about a cultural trail that is currently in implementation, incorporating public art. we'll go further into the western rural mountains of Maryland, into Cumberland, a former mining town, and then back down to the eastern shore, Salisbury, which is in the heart of the Delmarva, as we call it, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia Peninsula, on the Chesapeake, in the Chesapeake watershed, and actually they have a river that flows right into the Chesapeake Bay. So starting in Frederick, here's William painting a mural that is actually the style of a trompe-l'oeil, and trompe-l'oeil means fool the eye. So what actually appears to be stone is painted. This is actually painted on a concrete bridge. It's completely fake. It's not real stone. This gateway that looks like it's three-dimensional and going into this tunnel, the baby that has been fooled too, who's poking her finger at the gate. And William's putting the final touches on this beautiful fruit and grotto. I'd like to highlight that he worked very closely with the community in Frederick. This is called Community Bridge, and it's painted on a concrete bridge. And he received images of, if you will, the image you see here of the hands of the community coming together, and he painted these symbols all across the bridge, highlighting how everyone wanted to improve Frederick, pulling it out of its industrial low that had been experienced in the 1950s and 60s. This mural was started in 1993, and now today it is an amazing, vibrant corridor. This is the Carroll Creek. The bridge is right here. Again, you can sort of see the stone, and that is a trompe-l'oeil. It's not real stone. Here's the community celebration when the mural debuted. But as you can see on the right, the incredible economic impact that the downtown has experienced, Frederick has experienced, with the arts and cultural development, with Community Bridge literally being its foundation of cultural growth. This is again, no longer a rural community. It is now a commuter city of Washington, D.C. and Baltimore. And the downtown is so vibrant, galleries, shops, theater, symphonies. It's been quite a transformation. And William Cochran is based in Frederick. He was the leader and innovator on this project. And he went westward, essentially, to Hagerstown, which is in the Piedmont region of Maryland. It experienced a real loss of population, again, with the industrial exodus of major industry. It used to be a airplane aviation hub for the building of airplanes, but that is no longer, and they are looking to cultural development as a key to the next wave of prosperity. The cultural trail has just been passed by the City Council, and I'll show you some of the images from this fantastic plan that's literally just broken ground in Hagerstown. As you can see, the rich history of the informal industrial past, and now artists are moving into these beautiful open spaces, wonderful light. But many of these downtown shops are empty. The empty storefront syndrome is really a challenge, and they've experienced a brain drain. You know, the smart kids that go off to college don't come back, and so there's a very large population of elderly, a very large population of young people, and not necessarily a lot of folks in between. So we have actually, the Maryland State Arts Council has designated the downtown as an arts and entertainment district. We have 26 arts and entertainment districts across the state, and this is one of them that we're highlighting. Up here is actually Hagerstown Cultural Gem. It's the Museum of Fine Arts, and it's part of a city park. You can see the pond and people enjoying the park. But the museum is quite a distance, at least a mile, from the city's downtown. So visitors to Hagerstown might either go to the museum or they go to the downtown, but they might not do both. So the goal of the plan, and actually this is a view from the museum looking back towards the city. Let me move that arrow out of the way. Is to give visibility to these two anchors, the museum and the downtown, and through wayfinding, signage, and this proposed trail with public art along the trail, they're looking to increase visitorship at both of these locations and along the trail. This is the trail route. Again, this is the downtown. It's quite a distance. We have some existing green areas that's ideal for the trail, but sections of the trail will be along city sidewalks, a little stretch of boulevard here, and then culminating again at the city park. The museum is just on the other side of the pond. Next slide. There's a pervasive attitude that because of the economic challenges, not a lot happens in Hagerstown. Nothing can happen, a very defeatist attitude. And there's been this wonderful push to contradict that and to really give these positive messages on the downtown storefronts. And I just love these handwritten messages, you know, be the change. And together, we're going to bring Hagerstown back, and these are just a few of some storefronts in the downtown. There have been many, many meetings that William Cochran and the Cochran Studio have led. This is a huge turnout, one of many meetings where everyone was giving input on what the possibilities for the public art could be along the trail. And I just really want to highlight how artists are and can be the facilitators for that larger community-wide discussion, bringing together partners who might not normally speak or connect with one another, community members that see a common goal and work towards that goal. Here are three main areas I'll highlight. This is just one section of the trail, but here I also want to highlight that grab my arrow, the trail is very close to a public housing development for the elderly, and it's just so ideal that they will have access to a walking trail so close to where they live. And a proposed sculpture park is located first here, so the elderly can come out and see the kids playing. We have some existing industrial buildings. Sorry, I got to move the arrow. There's the sculpture play area. Here is the industrial buildings where proposed murals are going. And these are not your ordinary murals. I can't wait to show you the images. And here will be a gateway to the downtown, so that you know that you've arrived. You're about to enter the downtown core. You know, cue. Let's go get a lemonade. Let's go get some iced tea. Let's look in this art gallery. So let me get to the details. Here's just an example of what could be possible with these particular paving stones. The Maryland State Arts Council just gave a grant to start the artist selection process for what that creative paving pattern will be, and we'll be excited to see how this develops. Here's, again, an example of an artist by the name of Hence, H-E-N-S-E. I know probably many people have silos in their communities, and perhaps they've been painted. So this is really exciting to see the possibilities for something very large to take place. And so here are these large industrial buildings right there along the trail. And here, hence, we're illustrating an example of a very large-scale mural that he has painted these elsewhere. We haven't yet painted the industrial buildings, but it's in process. And here's a Photoshop rendering of what could be possible. And the artist, in the master plan, we've titled this The Mural of Unusual Size, which I think is a great title and a great genre to put out there for this next stage of the cultural trail development. Here is an example of what could be possible for the sculptural area. And then here it's made of natural wood. This, again, is cited somewhere else. And I'm going to jump from Hagerstown out to Cumberland in western Maryland. We have a project being developed by the Downtown Cumberland Arts Council. Let me grab my arrow. This is the existing site. It's along a regional trail, and this wall will have this proposed mural that's depicting the history of Cumberland. And here's the artist in process. He was selected through a community process, and Paris is the name of the artist. He's a local artist and is currently getting his MFA at Frostburg State University nearby. And these were literally shot a few days ago. So the mural is in development, and we look forward to seeing its final completion. Just going over to the Eastern Shore in Salisbury, the town has just completed a major master plan for the downtown that has the confluence of the three rivers. We met with the mayor and arts leaders actually just last week, looking at what the public art possibilities are for incorporating public art into this master plan. It's a similar community to Hagerstown, where there is the downtown, and then out on the outskirts is a major museum. And so, again, a cultural gem that has a significant distance from the downtown area that we're, trying to bring back business to. Here we have an illustration of how the master plan has looked at the various neighborhood areas. And it's very important to note, and I'm sure many of your communities out there have the challenge of when the interstate was brought, through the middle of a community. Here, Highway 50 is en route to the beach. Everyone's headed to the beach. And then north-south is Route 13. And these interstates just absolutely divided Salisbury racially. And so the master plan process and the future public art process, they are looking to bring these communities together in conversation about what is possible. That public art planning hasn't happened yet, but on the river in downtown Salisbury, they have developed a recent river walk, which a portion of has just gone in. And they've also done a demonstration project for this stormwater retention project. They do experience flooding. The Chesapeake does have rising tides, and artists, many artists are addressing climate change in their work, and I think that the potential public art for Salisbury will be ripe for looking at innovation in this particular area. So I'm going to turn it over to Fran, and thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Liesel. Some art examples there, and I think we'll continue on with our presentations, but know that Casey has a very good question, about how you really involve the community in determining what the murals look like, or even what is the community process to choose some of these artists that you've described. So know that I'm going to get back to you on that question, but first we're going to go to Joseph Kunkel. He is a community designer and educator working on building capacity in Indian country. His career is centered on community-based design, ranging from material research and fabrication to community-based planning, design, and development. As an Enterprise Rose Architectural Fellow, he worked with the Sustainable Native Communities Collaborative and the Santo Domingo Tribal Housing Authority, where he worked on a 41-unit affordable housing development. He also led the Housing Master Plan for the tribe, which started with a National Endowment for the Arts Our Town grant and has led to an Art Place America grant award. This award will fund multiple art projects tying together 2 new affordable housing developments on the Santo Domingo Pueblo. He joins us from New Mexico. Thanks so much for joining us, Joseph, and go ahead.
Hi all. Thanks. Thank you for the introduction. So I guess I'll just kind of jump into it. So I work with the executive director of the Sustainable Native Communities Collaborative, looking at ways of bringing architecture and planning to communities to help to indigenous and tribal communities to help them kind of plan about and so on. Let me get to the arrow. There you go. So what do we do? Really, the Sustainable Native Community, we focus on environmentally sustainable development in American Indian country. And then, like I was saying, through planning, architecture, and design, and technical assistance along with research, we try and find ways, creative ways to kind of invite and fund and finance community development. And so as an Enterprise Rose Architectural Fellow, which I completed this past December, we saw this as an opportunity to do 2 things: really try and find the work and do the work on the ground at Santo Domingo, kind of looking at it as boots on the ground, and then trying to tie that together with this national dialogue and research through the Sustainable Native Communities Collaborative. And so this idea of doing the work on the ground and then sharing that with all 567 different federally recognized tribes was a way to kind of bring the information that was happening on the ground to a larger body, and then vice versa, see what's going on around the country in Indian country, and then bring that back to Santo Domingo. And so it really became a way to share this knowledge, and that is something that we continue to try and do, and try and share that voice with different tribes across the country. And so I like to start with an aerial or this map of the United States. Everything you see here, everything outlined in a dark line is a reservation boundary, and everything that is shaded as a tribal population. And so this idea of understanding and knowing the populations you work with, and knowing the situations, and knowing those locations in relationship to either urban areas or rural areas is really important when we're thinking about community development, when we're thinking about access, and when we're thinking about different ways of creating opportunities for different tribal communities. And so this idea of a population of 5.2 federally recognized tribal populations, and then the idea that there's 5.2 million Indians in the country, 567 federally recognized tribes. How do they all get along? How do we share resources? How do we kind of move forward from there? So this idea of going back and forth between better places and better lives, how do we take the knowledge that we have as architects, planners, designers, artists, and really invest in place? And the idea is that the result hopefully gets back to this idea of better lives for those communities. And so really, what does that mean? And so in essence, I find myself a lot of the times stepping out of the role as architect and planner and trying to find ways to create a dialogue with the community, with tribal members or with community members and so on. So it's really this idea of working with people, and the idea of engaging with community and trying to find ways and different ways of engaging through community, not just your typical community meeting where you have an afternoon or an evening gathering and sharing, but the idea of how do you find ways and how do you integrate and engage with those communities. It's a little bit of understanding environment, right? And so this idea of, so this is one way that during my fellowship with the Santo Domingo Tribal Housing Authority, of engaging the population, going from one of the new housing development sites to the other housing development sites, and physically walking that connection, and so on. So and it's also understanding places and culture. This is the Santo Domingo Trading Post, which became a hub for where there is potential for the arts and incubating arts, and how you can potentially incubate art. The idea too is that this becomes a node right across from the Trading Post is a railroad hub, and across from that is the housing development that the Housing Authority is currently managing, or it's actually under construction, but that's what they're going through right now. And so this idea of community engagement, creative placemaking, collaborative actions, all these are kind of key words or current wordage to try and find ways to really engage and try and find ways of working with community, and then hopefully taking action and then developing that into something that's maybe a little bit larger, or that brings community back together. And so we like to start with the saying that designing with community helps to create positive social change. And so the idea of these principles and goals that we've developed over the 3 years of the fellowship is community vision, engagement, and participation. And so really like I said, stepping out of the role as architect and leveraging the community's vision and having them become the architect of their own vision. And then establishing a vision and trying to make sure that that is a long-term commitment to change, and making sure that the community really understands that long-term commitment, and so that capacity hopefully stays within the community once the architect, the planner, or I leave the community. Or so this idea of how do you allow that capacity to stay once that capacity is gone, or that initial capacity is gone. And then the idea of engaging community so that they understand the clarity and understanding of place, and making sure that when you're working with community, they're participating, and participation from all over from the whole kind of vision of the community. So from tribal youth, tribal leaders, community members, etc. And so this is where it really kind of becomes essential, right? So how do you measure success? And that's a long-term measurement, right? And not always, we shouldn't always be focused on these measurements, but the idea is that hopefully we get to the point where it's sustainable community impact, and we see that over time. And a lot of this work takes many years to kind of actually have sustained commitment to change. And so I'll dive really quickly into some of the work at Santo Domingo and how it came to be, and potentially where the tribe is now with their work. And so it started back in 2013, in the summer of 2013, where, like I was saying before, walking from one of the potential housing developments to another potential housing development. And that we kind of was a way to kind of engage the community, and it basically became a community meeting that was a series of conversations when we walked from point A to point B. And that we gathered a lot of information during that walk and documented it, and that started to influence what that connection meant for the community. And so here you have some aerials and a map. So here you have the historic village on the left. Let me grab my arrow and look over here. So back here you have the historic village. Here you have one of the new housing developments, and then the future housing development on this end. And so this became the trail that was going to be, or is under development and going out to bid as we speak. And so the idea that this becomes the connection between the village and the new housing development. And so here, again, the idea of Domingo, here you have the housing development that the Housing Authority is currently working on, and then the village, and this idea of connecting the two became extremely important. And so through that was all that kind of initial study was, like we were saying before, was funded through a National Endowments for the Arts grant, an Art Town grant. And that led to a larger grant that was funded through Art Place to, again, help fund the art nodes along this trail. And so it became a collaboration between the tribe, the Housing Authority, and some of these funders, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the New Mexico Department of Transportation, the tribe. And so there were a lot of different partners working in this project all together. And so working in that instance, the idea was to hire or bring on local artists to design these nodes. And so with these nodes, it became important because we were typically, as we look at the Santo Domingo population, 80 to 85%, 75% of them consider themselves, or art is a main means of bringing in or providing food on the table. And so how do we start to kind of leverage that, and how do we provide the infrastructure to allow that to maybe prosper and create an arts infrastructure or create an economy around the creative economy? And so we started to employ artists that are typically used to making things at the scale of the table, the jewelry, pottery, etc. And then how do you scale that up? So the idea was to bring in a national artist and then marrying this, and then try and train and educate the artists to scale up their art and envision their art at the scale of the landscape, which became incredibly exciting for the community and for the artists and for the project itself. This is an image of just the two housing developments. And so, like I was saying here, I'll bring my arrow back down. And so here we have the new housing near the village, which is here, which is also situated around different tribal services, to the new housing development by the trading post. The trading post is located here with the rail runner stop and then the new housing development. So you have a lot of different resources, and developing around resources and planning this out so that there is a long-term vision that as this fills in, it's actually supporting the community from the bottom up. And so this is just a zoomed in image of the 10-acre site, which is going to be ideally or will hopefully become a home ownership site. And then just some architectural renderings of the different tribal resources that are situated next to the housing development, making sure that there's supportive services next to the housing. And then just some renderings of the plan itself, to the idea of zooming back out. So this idea of zooming in and zooming out became really important, trying to understand the community at the small scale and then zooming back out and understanding what are those connections. As you can kind of see, we were trying to understand, well, how long does it take to walk from the village to Domingo if they were to walk? How long does it take to walk from the new housing development to Domingo or from the new housing development up to the highway? So just trying to understand some of these nuances became critical to the overall process. And then we have the Domingo development, which is, like I was saying, trading post, rail runner stop or heavy rail runner stop that connects the tribe or the reservation to both Santa Fe and Albuquerque, which is also very critical because it allows them to access education, jobs, etc. And so the idea of situating the housing development next to the rail runner becomes this interesting rural transit-oriented development that many urban areas have access to, and this is a new kind of nuance in a rural setting. And then we just have this idea of attached housing, basing it off of the historic village, and so there is a precedent for that type of housing as well. So what's really next for the community? So the housing development at Domingo is under construction. The trail is about to go under construction, so there's going to be these pieces of infrastructure coming online that hopefully will help support the community from the bottom up, and then hopefully kind of move forward from that point. And I kind of like to end with this slide because especially in rural, and as you probably all know this, in rural and definitely Indian country, have to really think about how design can improve people's lives, especially the younger generations, because housing doesn't necessarily turn over. Rural populations don't tend to turn over, and so we're really designing for this next generation because they're going to be the owners of these future pieces of infrastructure and homes. And so if we create a sustainable community, ideally we're passing on something to them that they can then live in and prosper in and so on. And so thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. Exciting. And I have just a question for clarification, just in case some people aren't sure what an art node is and how those might be determined, since you talked about them.
Oh, sure. So the art nodes are basically, it's landscape art. So similar to what we were seeing in the previous presentation. So we were designing large pieces of land art, and so the tribe is going to design these large pieces of land art, whether it's a big pot or a big piece of sculpture. And so we located these art nodes along the trail that whatever the artists were to design would be placed in that particular area. So it's a piece of a large-scale piece of land art.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Before we get to your questions, thanks for all the people that are adding to our questions right now. I'd like to introduce Shane Hale. He is the city manager of Cortez, Colorado, where he helped lead the cities of Cortez's Heart and Soul effort. Cortez Heart and Soul included intentional activities to engage voices typically underrepresented in local decision-making. Shane worked to engage the local Mountain Ute tribe in design and planning of a gateway beautification project, hosting design workshops on the Ute Reservation. And by engaging people in their neighborhoods where they live, Shane was also a part of a successful effort to involve the city's Hispanic residents in planning. So I think Shane is probably going to focus on the Ute project, the gateway beautification. But Shane, go ahead.
Right, and I'm actually going to touch on that. So thank you so much. I appreciate everybody calling in. Like was just mentioned by Fran, the city was awarded a Heart and Soul Plan grant from the Orton Family Foundation in 2011, basically the end of the year, about when I came on. So I'm going to speak for the next few minutes on one of the cool projects that kind of happened during that, as well as some of the ways that we were able to involve the public in our decision making. So geographically, we really are in southwest Colorado in what's called the Four Corners region. Of course, we border Utah, New Mexico, and Arizona. You can see on the slide that it's 70% white. We also have about 16% of our population is Hispanic, and the last 12% is Native American. So, well, one of the premises of Heart and Soul is you really are trying to involve everybody in decision making, and put another way, you're trying to get beyond the usual suspects. And so, as a brief example, when we started in Heart and Soul, we had a hearing, and the discussion was on whether or not we should allow RVs to set up in trailer parks. We had a couple of trailer park owners that had requested that we allow RVs in there just for the very sense that it would be a little bit more profitable for them. So we had a public hearing, and we ended up with all the usual suspects, right? Everybody who spoke owned a trailer park or managed a trailer park. And at the end of this hearing, council looked around and said, you know, the only people we haven't heard from are the people who are actually impacted. You know, where are all the people who actually live in the trailer parks? And so, as you can imagine, you know, these folks are poor, they're disenfranchised, they're oftentimes disengaged. And I think more to the point, they don't really believe that their opinion matters. And part of that is because nobody ever really asked them what they think. And so with council's direction, we scheduled the second public hearing. But prior to this one, we went and we hung door hangers on every door in these trailer parks. We actually got as many mailing addresses as we could get and invited them to the meeting, and just went out of our way to make sure that we had public that felt engaged and that we really were hearing from everybody involved. So along this process and along Heart and Soul, we engaged 1,350 different members of the community, which means we really got qualitative input from them on what they valued in the community. If you'll remember from the previous slide, we have a population of about 8,500 people. So we managed to touch and speak to 1 out of 6 people, which I think is, you know, really indicative of a good outreach effort. We did this through 55 different community-wide meetings and outreach events. Sometimes when we had these events, we would go and we would participate in an existing special event. This one is from our Summerfest. And so basically whenever we had a beer or a banjo anywhere in Cortez, there was some booth right next to them with a Heart and Soul where we were just talking to people as they came by. The other way that we did this is by hosting our own special meetings. So this was one of the 4 block parties that we sponsored. This was a specific outreach to the Hispanic community. And prior to this, just in laying the groundwork, just so we can make contact with these folks, we actually had a Spanish-speaking person on our Citizen Advisory Committee. They joined the Spanish-speaking church and was a member there for about 4 months, really making these inroads to have this communication with these folks. And so then we had the block party, and we really made it worth their while. You know, we had an interpreter there. We had representatives from the local schools if parents wanted to talk to principals. We even had somebody to answer immigration questions. So we really, did more than just barbecue for people. We really tried to outreach and really have more of a qualitative relationship with them. Sorry. So one of the early things that came out after about a year in the process, a theme that we heard from hundreds of people is that they really cared about beautification. They really wanted us to take a look at our entryways, take a look at some private properties, and really make a more focused effort on cleaning up the city. This is actually from a charrette that we had called The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly of Cortez, where people could take pictures of things they liked and didn't like, and we could just discuss it. So around that time, CDOT, or Colorado Department of Transportation, was going to repave South Broadway, or Highway 491. And when we started talking to them, we found out that they had absolutely no money budgeted to do anything with the medians. As I explained to City Council, really their plan was to just double down on ugly. We had these really ugly medians, and CDOT had no intention to do anything with them for the next 50 years. So staff did a little bit of research, and we determined that addressing them would be about $650,000. And so we went to council and said, we think we ought to do this. And council said, well, we understand that people care about beautification, and we know that that's a large community ethic, but for $650,000, we really need you to go and check back in and make sure that they care about it this much, and that this project is really something they'd want us to take on. But secondly, if we are going to focus on beautification and we are going to hire a landscape architect and engineers and everything, we don't want to narrow our scope to just one area of town. We want to look at every entrance. We want to make sure that if we're going to go through this process, we have a long-term beautification plan for the city. So with our marching orders, we went first door to door, basically every business along South Broadway we went and talked to. They were in the middle of that CDOT paving project right then, so we had a lot of fatigue with slower traffic, limited traffic movements, and a lot of access issues. And so in the end, we got a lot of business support of the project with the caveat that we never, ever block off any of their access in order to do it. We also jumped into a lot of different design charrettes with the public, and because we already had hundreds of people say that they cared about beautification, and because we had a citizen advisory team and we had a great network of people, these charrettes were extremely well attended. I mean, I'd say maybe a little bit shy of 100 people, but they were really well attended. We got great input. Also along the way, we went down to Toyoak, and Toyoak is a city that's inside of the Mount Ute Reservation. It is one of 2 reservations in Colorado, and Toyoak is located 12 miles south of the city. So we were invited down around this time to come and talk to them about our plans. And so we did, I think, kind of the normal city thing, right? We sent 15 people down. We had food, we had a PowerPoint, we had beautification plans, and before we could even really get started, they just kind of stopped us and said, wait, who are you and why are you here? And, just, I guess, kind of changed our concept as far as what we were doing there. And in the end said, quite frankly, no offense, but there's way too many white people in this room, and we don't feel comfortable, and if you're going to come down here and have a conversation with us, we're going to leave the meeting. And so we did get re-invited back down, but this time we were asked to send 2 people, the landscape architect and the planner, and it was really their meeting. They set the agenda. They told us what they valued. They told us what they wanted to focus on. And what you see there is a rendering of really what it boiled down to, is that they really cared about the entryway. They really cared about coming in from Toyoak, how that entrance to town looked. And so there's really 3 big elements that kind of came out of that. We have the drum. We have the pottery for like the planter box that wanted kind of the traditional Ute pottery look. And then the lizard, which is really symbolic to the Utes. They wanted the lizard to be incorporated. So you see that our artist actually incorporated the tail into the O. So I am disappointed to tell you that I can't show you this thing built. We do have budget to build 3 of these in 2016, and we are currently under the process of acquiring right away. So tune in 6 months, and I'll show you that. So fast forward, so we did end up doing the landscaping project. Here's one of the sections after the completion. the project did run about $650,000. We did stage it so no businesses weren't impacted. The only thing that we weren't able to do, and maybe I'll talk to Liesel after this, is that big public art pieces. We had some sculptures that were kind of, you know, the public said they would value, but quite frankly, it was just a budget buster to try to include these really large public art pieces in this project during our phase one. This is a picture from just this previous Monday. You see, like after a couple of years, that this landscaping has really come in. Here's another one. You can just see, you know, it's just so night and day from those ugly medians we were looking at. And then kind of with this final slide, I'd just say that even though we had all this great aesthetic improvement, and every time I drive by, I'm just so glad that we got involved with it because it just looks and feels so much better. But really the biggest bang for our buck had nothing at all to do with landscaping. And I just say that because we had such great outreach. We talked to so many folks. We really listened to them and kept our promises. We held up our end. And because of that, this project comes up time and again as such a positive example of the city listening to our residents. And so I just think all the goodwill that we bought by doing this project really was worth more than even the landscaping that we got out of it. And then this project has really served as a lead-in for numerous other beautification efforts. So we've had a lot of private business reinvestment. We've had a lot of other city projects. So all in all, it was just a great project for us. So that's all I've got.
Shane, that's just fantastic. And I think you more than answered John from Oregon's question about long-term relationship building. I mean, this project seems to have done that. And I love your double down on ugly that no longer exists in your beautification program. So that's really terrific. So thank all three of you. As I mentioned before, I wanted to get back to Liesel, really looking at Casey's question about how citizens were engaged in design, in the design of murals themselves, in the choosing of artists, perhaps, in what you were going to do. How did you get that citizens involved in that, Liesel?
Sure. Well, first of all, the example I showed in Hagerstown, the rendering of that mural of unusual size was really a concept. William Cochran, who developed the master plan, was really on the entire trail trying to just show examples of, gee, this might be possible, putting a mural on this industrial building. So while that particular artist, hence his work was illustrated, he's actually not been selected yet. Yes, the best practice is a community-driven process, and determining what that mural should be will happen when an artist is selected. And usually, most communities, an open call is conducted where any artist can apply. Now, for a building of this size, clearly an artist who has experience working at this scale is probably going to be the most qualified person, and then ideas will be culled for, you know, what will actually be painted, you know, and another level overview will happen with the community input.
Okay. Thank you so much. Terrific. So another question that came in, and maybe this is to Joseph, since you're so involved in building housing, kind of how does one take into account traditional architecture of the tribe in building new housing? And or another question that came in earlier, how do you balance nature or landscapes into rural design, since you also are talking about these nodes? So how do you bring in the landscape that is there and the tradition that is there into the design that you're proposing, or you work with the community to help make manifest?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So initially, and it comes out through these engagement processes or these community engagement meetings, and it's really trying to understand the culture and the place and the climate and the environment and all the above, right? And so, for instance, if we're working with a Southwest Pueblo or Southwest tribe, if it is a Pueblo or a Navajo. It's really trying to understand historically and the kind of historic planning patterns. And the Pueblos, for instance, it's a really good example of urban design. When you think about the historic villages and the nature of the historic villages, it's trying to understand those planning patterns and how that could potentially influence how you plan and design the layout of the site development, right? And so the Domingo housing development became a way in which we learn from the historic village and plan the streets and plan the orientation and plan the housing units in a very similar manner. Well, not copying, but kind of learning from the past. And then also it's trying to understand the building materials. What are the appropriate building materials to be using in the Southwest? We understand that adobe became, this kind of natural mud brick became very important to use, although from an affordable housing standpoint, that material was a little bit costly. So how do we kind of look at it from a planning standpoint and trying to also understand the cultural nuances of the community. How do community members use their spaces during traditional days, and allowing for those spaces to thrive and design around a large public space within the housing unit itself, right? And so moving away from the kind of Western European model of a house and integrating their ways of space planning. And it might not necessarily look like an old historic village house, but you're designing and planning in a contemporary manner that allows for those cultural nuances to come through the architecture and planning.
Terrific. Thank you. Many of our listeners are interested in how you really engage people. There are people who are concerned about people who say, oh, we've tried that before, or, you know, getting the concerned citizens involved to make real change. There's another woman from California that talks, you know, how do I use social media? She used door hangers like Shane, you did in Cortez, and that works really well because the newspaper and regular notices don't work that well, but banners and door hangers do. And so how do you really engage the community, again, looking at Tom Flanagan's questions, to really make sure you're getting the right vision? How do you gather that participation to validate what's being proposed and what you're about to do? I will go to Shane first on this one about, you know, validation and getting more people involved.
Right. So I did mention, you know, like, for example, when we did our outreach to the Spanish-speaking community, just based on general just distrust and a lot of folks, you know, aren't necessarily here legally, and so they really don't want to ever be involved with any kind of city project. And so, you know, in that and recognizing that, we actually had a member that joined the Spanish-speaking church, kind of made those relationships over a few months to lay the groundwork for us to do that. Another example, we had a barbecue at the high school, and right across the street is a really large trailer park. It's probably the largest in the city. And in a lead-in to that, our volunteers actually just went door to door and said, hey, look, we'd love to have you guys come over here. We're talking about what we love in the community, and we'd really like your input. And so it's, you know, I think just kind of looking past the normal, you know, you do the public hearing notice in the paper and expect somebody to show up. And we know if you do that, you're going to get the same results, which is just the usual suspects, a couple squeaky wheels that are there, but you're not going to really deeply engage your community. And so I think what we found is when you go and actually ask them and you say, we want you there, your importance actually matters to us, and they're hearing that from the city planner or the city manager or the mayor, you know, they actually feel like their opinion does matter. And then I think the follow-through with that is after you get their opinions and after they tell you what they value, you actually need to follow through with that. So, you know, I think for us, implementation has been a continued battle cry as well. We want to make sure that this plan just doesn't end up on a shelf, that we're continuing to implement and put these things into action so people know that it didn't waste their time and that their opinion really did matter.
And I think, Shane, I'm not sure if I have this story right, but I think with the Mountain Ute, I think when the planners first went there, they had a proposal that used a a graphic of the mountain, of Ute Mountain, and it was very clear that that was not okay. And
oh yeah, that's right.
Right?
Yeah, I think with our first meeting, we screwed up a lot of things. We had a lot of assumptions and we were wrong, and we were well intentioned, we were just wrong. So yeah, they it was a good lead-in for us. It was, I think, fairly historic as far as hosting all these meetings down in Toyac, and really hearing back from them. We talked about, well, geez, what do you love about Cortez? And quite frankly, all of that stuff they couldn't care less about. They really wanted to have an impact on the entrance. They wanted to have an impact on just the aesthetics and that it represented the tribe. And they wanted to make sure that they were using symbols that represented them, and we weren't co-opting anything from the tribe.
Right. Thank you so much. Such a good story and so important to hear. Liesel, I think I'll come back to you with a question from Tom from Rhode Island. And he asks, how do you first create a view that includes all perspectives and then scale up with a view to engage all citizens? So it's kind of a tricky question, but that you have something that you feel includes all perspectives, but then you have to kind of sell it to the rest of the community and make sure that all citizens kind of buy in and think this is great. Do you have thoughts about how you do that?
That's a great question. In my experience, I have seen the amazing ability of artists to go into communities that the city planners or the leaders of a development project didn't know existed. It's about, kitchen table conversations and, going after work when people are actually home and not, scheduling meetings when no one can actually attend. And that grassroots effort comes through artists selected for these projects that do that, ground paving, on the ground work to meet with people. And there's a real talent out there of artists. This is now termed socially engaged practice. These are majors in art school where artists are just really not based in the studio all the time anymore. They want to get out and are being trained in those processes, and often city planners and, again, the developers will, you start small and then it grows from that grassroots engagement effort. And it can be a 2 to 3, as we all know, 5 or more year process. Doesn't happen overnight.
Thank you very much. I want to get back to Casey has some interesting comments, and among them is, can community members help with the painting? Or even, and Joseph, you might have some thoughts here, how, there are many examples of projects are utilizing and training. Are there other ones where they actually utilize and train locals to help with design and development? Are there ways to integrate that into these development and design processes? And when you have something like 70% of the population you're working with that are artists or make some kind of a living as artists, how do you incorporate all of those folks? And is there some training that goes on as well about design?
Well, I mean, from a very kind of simple standpoint, it's hard to include everyone, but I think the goal of the project at Santo Domingo was to try and engage as many local artists as possible so that they themselves would be doing the initial design work and training them. And so the idea was behind the project and behind the grant was to identify local Santo Domingo artists and then bring in a national artist that works at the scale of the landscape to help train those local artists through a series of workshops. And so over a year-plus period, we would have these workshops where we would engage and bring together the small group of local artists with the national artists. And so about once a month, the national artists would come. We would do a 2 to 3 day workshop, and then they would be given basically it was basically a studio environment where they were given critique and given ways of moving forward. And then a month later, the national artist would come back, and we would have that kind of conversation and that engagement. So there was some training going on, and in some respect, we are seeing some of the local artists actually prosper from that, where that kind of thinking has actually pushed forward their own design work from what it was prior to this engagement. And so they are maturing, they are growing, and it is kind of prospering in that way. And hopefully that knowledge will be kind of spread through the community, right? And so with this project, and hopefully there's more projects like it that will help kind of seed other kind of creative projects throughout the community, it being a creative community itself. So, yeah.
Terrific. Thank you so much. I'm sorry we are out of time. Our hour is up. As I thank you, if there's one final thought that you are moved to say with any of our guests, I would welcome them at this time. You guys have just been terrific. So I want to thank Liesel Fenner for your insights from Maryland and beyond. Is there a burning last thought that you have for our audience?
Yes, if anybody's interested in public art best practices of how to do this work, I'd really recommend going to Americans for the Arts Public Art Network page. That's artsusa.org.
Fabulous, and we might make a note of it here if we can. And Joseph, again, thank you for sharing your stories from the Southwest. Any last thoughts? Of course, you just gave us a terrific one a minute ago.
No. I mean, I think we just need to engage our creative population. I think there's a lot to uncover and work with, and influence our everyday lives. So yeah, we just need to keep pushing these efforts forward.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Joseph. And Shane Hale, thanks for joining us from Cortez, Colorado. Your last thoughts about engaging diverse voices?
I just think it's a lot of work when you start out. There's a lot. It takes a lot of time, and it doesn't really feel like you're going anywhere for a while. But I think all that initial investment and laying the groundwork with your community really pays off in the end. If you can put in the time and the effort in the beginning, I think that it more than pays for itself in the end.
Okay, thank you so much. And for those of you who might have had questions that you don't feel were answered, we hope that you can write Caitlin and she can connect you with one of our guests, and hopefully your answers will be questioned. I know that the expertise and wisdom from our guests are appreciated from coast to coast. Thank you so much for participating. Thanks also to CIRD, the Citizens Institute on Rural Design, and the Orton Family Foundation who make these sessions possible. We hope you take a moment to fill out the survey provided as a link on the Adobe Connect page. Also, a recording of this webinar will be sent around to participants and posted on our website, www.orton.org. And we hope you join us next month when we'll take a look at how creating partnerships within community organizations help to ensure and reinforce successful community development efforts. Thank you all for joining us today. We wish your community beautiful, meaningful design and a delightful summer. That's all for now. See you next time. Bye-bye.